Welcome back, everybody. My name's McCarthy. We are Cyber News Global, and this is Let's Talk Cyber. Well, today, what a delightful young lady we've got for us. None other than Elaine McKechnie. She's the head of cybersecurity consultancy at iConfidential, one of our lead partners based in Edinburgh. Welcome to Let's Talk Cyber, Elaine. It's lovely to have you.
Thanks very much, Tommy. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, be taking part in Let's Talk Cyber.
Wonderful, Elaine. Before we get into our subject today, give us a little bit of a background about who Elaine McKechnie is for our listeners. Could you give us a brief background about who you are, where you've come from? What are your passions in life?
I'll try and keep it brief. There's been a long and winding road to here, Tommy. So I've recently joined iConfidential just back in August as their head of cybersecurity consultancy. And prior to that, I was working at Virgin Money. So I led a variety of roles there, but most recently I was looking after cyber strategy, policies and standards, threat intelligence, cyber insurance and security culture, which is a big passion of mine, really embedding culture within organisations. Prior to that, I led security investments programmes, both at Virgin Money, Clydesdale Bank, and before that at HSBC. And I suppose before I sort of dabbled in cyber, I worked in some roles in IT architecture as a business analyst. So I've got a deep passion for doing projects really well and analysing things and making sure we've gathered our requirements properly. But my real career, the first career I ever had was actually as a police officer. So people are often shocked when they find that out about me. I'm quite unassuming. So people saying, really, a police officer? But that was my first job. But I love the connection that I've got now between cyber, protecting data and customers and clients. With that really connects me with the old me, which was, protecting property and lives. So I love the connection between the two.
Bit of a change in career because as you know, my colleague Anne Coyle also was a former police officer. Going back in the day to protecting people, it was pretty straightforward. There's a criminal, let's apprehend a criminal, or let's serve justice. Now it's a little bit different online. Does sound like you've had quite a varied career in the banking world, protecting the banking industry. Now that you've joined iConfidential, why don't you tell us a little bit about who is iConfidential and what exactly do you do at iConfidential?
Sure. So there's kind of two bits to iConfidential. So we are based in Edinburgh and we have both a consultancy arm, which is the bit that I'm leading, and we're also a talent acquisition provider. So we've got over 150 associates in some pretty major clients all over the UK and beyond the UK as well. We've been on the go since the company was founded in 2008. And since 2018, what people don't often know about us is that we've actually become employee-owned, which is great. I've never worked at an employee-owned firm before, so that's really exciting. Everyone's got a bit of skin in the game to make sure things go really well. So we've mostly got clients in the financial service industry, and our consultancy team have a wealth of experience in that sector, but we've also active in other sectors such as legal and transport and really kind of lots of different areas where people just need our help. So we're very willing to understand different sectors, and really information security covers everything. So it's quite an easy place to stay at.
It's interesting, I guess, looking at the types of clients that you clearly support and work with. Can you set the scene a little bit for us on some of the major issues that these clients face on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So I think, working in the cybersecurity consultancy, are quickly getting to understand a range of really common themes that our customers are struggling with, Tommy. A lot of organisations at the moment are struggling with implementing security best practice, and there's huge amounts of pressure coming from regulators and vendors as well, who are trying to sell things to people that are claiming to be helping them to implement security best practice. Now, what's really important is to understand that every organisation has a different sense of their risk appetite, the type of data that they hold, the work that they do, and the sensitivity of the work and the data that they have. Not everybody's got the luxury of having built their own risk management framework. So they could be in quite a low maturity state around the risks and the issues that they really understand that their organisation is facing. And they might not have had the luxury of building a full suite of information security professionals to be able to help them understand the threat and translate that into risk that the business can understand in terms of impact to service availability or impact to their data integrity. So once you understand the risks, then it's much easier to think about how you can map a risk and control framework really together and map those controls to it.
Yeah, we do all understand, compliance is definitely the driving force for setting a good cyber hygiene baseline. But you just touched on a thing there about controls. What do you mean by controls? Why don't you just elaborate just a little bit for me on what you mean by controls?
Well, let me bring it to life a little bit. So we'll just use an example, which hopefully everybody will be familiar with, Tommy. So we take the risk of something like data loss. So every organization holds data of some form, and we all kind of sit with the risk of that data loss risk. So it could be a malicious insider, or it could be a bad actor coming in and preventing us from accessing our data or stealing the data. So exfiltration of the data, perhaps through the network or email systems. So that type of risk leads to fines, financial loss, reputational damage. And when we look at that risk, what's important is to understand, well, what would happen if we did nothing to that risk? So if we didn't treat the risk, we've got this inherent risk, which is probably quite high if you look at it on a kind of risk matrix. So we then have to consider what are the things that we could do to mitigate the risk of data loss. And when we talk about introducing either technology or processes to mitigate that risk, what we're actually introducing are controls. So the application of different security controls to help to mitigate that inherent risk, to bring it to a residual risk position, which is within the organization's risk appetite. So most organizations will say they've got no appetite to lose data. And really being able to understand how that risk is going to be realized allows us to think about what are the right controls to apply to bring that risk back within risk appetite.
So given your previous background working in the financial services sector, which is one of the heaviest regulated industries that you can consider, so obviously standards and control frameworks are quite important. What would you say about adopting a risk and control framework? Does it help, in your own opinion?
Well, adopting a security framework definitely helps because you can then evidence your compliance against a specific framework that you feel comfortable with applying in your organization. But it sounds great in theory, but it can be quite tricky in practice, Tommy.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And when you say tricky, do you want to elaborate a little bit about that? What do you mean by, what's tricky about adopting frameworks?
Sure. So there's lots of different frameworks out there, and there's really no silver bullet. So you could take something like, so NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. They have various frameworks. In cybersecurity, we would reference the cybersecurity framework, and it's got underlying frameworks that are relevant for NIST as well. I won't go into detail about those, but that's quite a broad-ranging framework that a lot of people adopt and they try and align to. But when you get down to the technical level of control, sometimes that you might want to evidence in an IT environment, then you may want to blend that with something else. Often you see people blending the NIST frameworks with what we call CIS controls. So the Centre for Internet Security have got an open framework which you can adopt there as well. So it's not really like a right and a wrong framework to adopt. And sometimes a blended approach is often best.
Yeah, it's interesting you touch on that, how you can blend frameworks, because obviously, you've just identified there is no silver bullet and not one size fits all. Have you got some examples of frameworks that people use? Can you expand a little bit more on the types of frameworks that you're familiar with that people use?
Sure. So as I touched on, you've got NIST and CIS. There's also, things that you can get certified in, like ISO 27001, which is all about your information security management system. And in different regions in the world, there's certain pressures depending on which sector that you work on to adopt perhaps more localized frameworks as well, particularly in the US, where we see Security Exchange Commission starting to push more secure by design principles. We expect to see much more robust frameworks being aligned to those type of things as well. So often what happens is you start with your policy standards in an organization, and you would then align your policy standards to your industry best practice framework that you wanted to adopt. You're then going to map out the specific requirements of your policy standard and look at how those things can be implemented in your organization. So that's often where organizations start. It's a bit of an assessment to say, right, okay, what's a good fit for us? maybe blending those things. So you might be using NIST at a high level to talk to the board, and then using CIS controls to talk to your IT department. So again, no right and wrong answer, Tommy, but thinking about how you can start to kind of review your posture and then implement things that are fit for purpose for the size and the scale of the organisation that you're operating in is actually a really important step. And then once you've done that mapping of policy standards to frameworks, you can bring that to life in something tangible that people can actually do by designing controls that then can be implemented and measured to see that they're effective. So we could probably do a whole other podcast on security metrics and measuring, Tommy. That would take a whole session in itself.
And I'm sure I would need at least one cup of coffee before and after. It's interesting, actually, that you say that, and it's now beginning to bring to life the role that iConfidential have in this space for me, because, you know, I've spent some time meeting quite a number of your board members, and we've done a few podcasts previously, and I was still trying to get my head around the whole iConfidential picture. So I guess, what's the role, the iConfidential consultant's role in all of this? Because I'm now beginning to understand that you fit into this quite well when it comes to advising clients and looking at frameworks. What's the role for the iConfidential consultant in all of this?
Well, if I look back at some of my previous roles, and now having landed at iConfidential and seeing some of the work that the consultants have already done around control frameworks and metrics and things like that, I'd have been crying out for some of this information in some of my previous roles. So perhaps a well-kept secret if you didn't know about it, Tommy. But first and foremost, I think the most important thing that we do is we really learn to understand the organisations that we're working with and the maturity level, but where they are today. So that kind of initial assessment, building up a rapport with them and just really kind of getting to a sense of what's important and where the risk lies in their business. And then we work with them to define these risk and control frameworks with supporting policies and standards, working with them to deliver the control environment that's going to help them sustain the delivery of those standards within the organisation, and then looking at how they can report that, because it's very, very challenging to be able to report that on a regular basis. And there's not a lot of great automation in this space at the moment. So often it becomes a bit of a cottage industry in itself, being able to measure something repeatable and have all the data around it that you need. So we generally embed a resource into each of the organisations, and that helps to knowledge transfer to existing client resources. And then we keep an updated list of all our policy standards that we have a kind of vanilla version of. So we can literally parachute somebody in with a version of policy standards that's aligned to any framework that the client would like. And then we look at the controls, we select the right controls to be able to mitigate the risks in their environment. And often what first happens then is that we identify gaps in the security posture. So we can also support with security improvement programs, looking at where the controls are perhaps deficient, and then building a program that looks at sort of return on investment with a risk-based focus, which again is a great way to appeal to your board and your senior business stakeholders when you're talking about security. Return on security investment program is really hard to define unless you've done that work on how the projects are delivering risk reduction.
Yeah, and you know, Elaine, you've said so many things there that's put a smile on my face for the simple reason it's clear to me that AI is not replacing an iConfidential consultant anytime soon, because the human element involved in the advice, the direction that's required from, you know, consultants like iConfidentials. It's pretty obvious that, you know, you guys are going to be fulfilling a necessary role in a highly regulated industry. I guess the ironic thing is we're almost coming to the end of our time and we've managed to stay on track, so congratulations. One closing remark from you, given your previous life in the heavily regulated banking industry, one closing remark from you for our listeners to consider that obviously are looking at frameworks or just on that journey of considering which framework they should be considering. What's the one closing remark, a takeaway from Elaine McKechnie to our listeners?
Don't feel like it's a mountain to climb. I think don't be worried if you're not sure where to start on this journey. You don't know what framework fits your organisation. You're not really sure about risks and controls and how to adopt all of this. It's really not a daunting journey if you've got a bit of help to support you through it. And it has a lasting benefit to your organisation if you can sort of get on the bus and really deliver and implement it. It's a great idea to have an assessment of your current maturity to help you realise where you're starting from, because quite often it's not zero, so you might be doing a little bit better than you think. And then it's better to know the gaps in your security posture so you can actually do something about them. So understanding your risk and being able to then map out, maybe you don't have millions of pounds to throw at your security programme, but if you only have 50, where would you be best to invest that 50,000? So just don't be scared is probably my closing remark there, my takeaway for people to consider.
And my takeaway there was clearly get on the bus, know your risks, get that assessment done so you know exactly what your maturity level looks like. And I think it's fair to say that the only way of doing that is by engaging with an organisation like iConfidential. Elaine, I can't begin to tell you how valuable that is for me, because it paints the right picture about the journey that organisations need to consider when they're looking at quite complicated frameworks and choosing the right framework that's fit for purpose. Because you're absolutely right what you said, there is no silver bullet. It's trial and error, but not a lot of organisations have that budget to allow them to make too many mistakes. So, Elaine, I really do appreciate the time you've given us. I know how busy you are just now getting settled at iConfidential and running at 100 miles an hour. If anyone out there is listening and interested in obviously reaching out to iConfidential, first and foremost, do what I did. Reach out to Elaine on LinkedIn. I guarantee you she'll respond. Further than that, you'll see the details at the end of this podcast. Elaine McKechnie, iConfidential, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Tommy. It's been great to be on Let's Talk Cyber.
Thank you, Elaine.